Welcome to the latest episode of the Edgar Rice Burroughs mini podcast. My name is Tim DeForest, and right now we are using these podcasts to look at adventure stories that were written contemporaneously with the works of Edgar Rice Burroughs. And today, we'll be talking about the novella Rhodes by Seabury Quinn, first published in the January 1938 issue of Weird Tales magazine. Now, Seabury Quinn is best remembered for his stories about an occult detective named Jules de Grandin, also published in Weird Tales, and also I'm very possibly mispronouncing poor Jules' name. Now, I don't know if he read Edgar Rice Burroughs' work or vice versa. They are certainly very different in their prose styles, so even if they were familiar with each other, I doubt that either of them influenced the other. But Rhodes is an adventure story that was published during the heyday of the pulp magazine, when ERB was also active. So it's worth a look here to add another piece to the adventure fiction mosaic that Burroughs was a part of. Also, Rhodes is a Christmas story, and this episode will be dropping in December of 2021, a little bit before Christmas. So it fits for the season as well. Rhodes is actually the origin of Santa Claus. And it's a wonderful origin, beating out even the Rankin Bass television special Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Rhodes is divided into 3 chapters. The first chapter is The Road to Bethlehem. And here we meet a mercenary named Claus, spelled with a K, K-L-A-U-S, who comes from Northern Europe and has been making a living as a soldier and gladiator for King Herod of Judea. Claus has been saving his money, and as he says to a Roman soldier, "I've had my fill of fighting. Now I go back to till my father's acres, perchance to go a Viking, if the spirit moves me. But hereafter I fight for my own gain or pleasure, not to the humor of another." Now, by the way, I believe that Claus here is using the term Viking a few centuries too early in terms of historical accuracy. If anyone listening knows better than me about that, please let me know. But he still makes his point. He wants to go home, and he wants to fight for himself. Now, the story starts out with Claus asleep, camping out somewhere in Judea. 3 cut purses attempt to do away with him in his sleep and then rob his corpse. This allows the story to start out with an appropriate bang, and it tells us several important things about Claus. First of all, we learn you definitely do not mess with him. The noise of the approaching cut purse wakes him up, and Claus breaks the guy's wrist. And then we discover that Claus is not normally vengeful or without mercy. He lets all 3 of the villains go, though he does deliver a rather stern warning. "Now get thee gone from out of my sight, thou and thou hangdog friends of thine, before I crush that puny neck between these hands of mine." We see here that Quinn is using the grammar of the King James Bible for his characters. Presumably because this story is set in biblical times, and the King James would have been the commonly used Bible at the time it was written. Of course, the characters would have been speaking Aramaic to one another, but this is simply how Quinn chooses to relate that dialogue to us. Since he handles the archaic grammar well and makes the dialogue sound cool, I think we can say that he made the correct decision. Anyway, back to Claus's threat that he would crush the bandit's neck with his bare hands. Since Claus is described as a big guy, carrying an axe and a 2-handed sword, we have no trouble believing that he could carry out this threat. Though Claus is not bloodthirsty, we quickly learn that he knows how to spill blood if necessary. A brief conversation with a passing Roman soldier helps establish Claus's background as a gladiator and his intention to return to his homeland. But the next day, his journey is interrupted when he passes through a small village. He hears a woman crying out, and he immediately enters a home to investigate. Another indication of Claus's inherently heroic personality. What he finds here is a tragedy. A woman is mourning her dead child, and that child has been killed by a sword stroke. Herod's soldiers have gone through the village, killing small boys. This, of course, is the slaughter of the innocents, as recounted in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2. King Herod had learned that a future king was being born in Bethlehem, but he didn't know exactly who it was. So, concerned that this king would take his throne, he ordered all children 2 years and younger to be killed. Mary and Joseph, warned by an angel, had left Bethlehem with Jesus, heading for Egypt. Now, back to the story. Klaus leaves the grieving widow some money. It's the best thing he can do for her. He continues his own journey, but as the story tells us, quote, the memory of the widow woman's murdered son has set a canker in his brain, unquote. The story continues to establish Klaus as a compassionate and heroic man, despite his profession as a mercenary. Soon he hears another cry for help, the yells from both a man and a woman. Though we're only a few pages into the story, it's no surprise at all by now that when Klaus runs to help, he sees the man and the woman surrounded by 11 of Herod's soldiers. They identify themselves and warn him back, but Klaus is having none of that. By Odin's ravens, I care not if ye be Caesar's soldiers. I'll have your reason for attacking this good man and wife, or the sword will sing its song. By now, there's no denying it. Klaus is awesome, and I'm going to be just like him when I grow up. Now, the soldiers don't back down, and one of them attempts to take a sleeping infant from the woman in order to kill it. Now, in all likelihood, Jesus was probably a toddler by the time the family fled to Egypt, but we don't know that for certain, so what the heck. Klaus goes into berserker mode. In a brief but exciting action scene, he kills 4 of them with his sword, takes out another 2 by bashing their head together, and then uses his axe to kill 2 more. And that sends the remaining 2 enlisted men fleeing. The officer in charge explains that he's acting under Herod's orders to kill the local children. Klaus doesn't care for his excuse and cleaves the officer nearly in 2 with a blow from his axe. He takes note of the people he just saved. I like that Quinn did his biblical research here. Joseph is described as about 50. I think he was probably a little younger than that, I would guess in his 30s, but he was definitely older than Mary, who Klaus notes is about 15 years old. Joseph thanks Klaus and explains that he's fleeing Bethlehem after being warned by an angel, by an angel of the Lord. Now, up to this moment, he and Mary have not been explicitly identified. By now, even the more inattentive of readers would realize who they are. It's important to note that the names of the family are never used in this chapter, since the story is being told from Klaus's point of view. He actually never learns their names, at least not at this time. Now, Joseph is conscious of the consequences of Klaus's action. The soldier has saved the family, but this will inevitably put a price on his head. Klaus, though, laughs this off. He's confident in his abilities with his sword, and he figures he'll do okay. He then asks to look at the baby he just saved, saying that it will do him good after not showing up in time to save the widow's child earlier. And when he looks at the child, things get weird for him. A voice says to him, Klaus, Klaus, because thou hast done this for me, and risked thy life and freedom for a little child, I say to thee that never shalt thou taste death until thy work for me is finished. Now, Klaus doesn't want this, though. He's afraid of growing old and feeble. Instead, he asks if he can die in battle one day. But God's plans are rarely our plans. Klaus is told the following. Thou who hast put thy life in forfeit for the safety of a little child has better things than that in store for thee. When the name of Odin is forgot, and in all the world there is no man to do him reverence at his altars, thy name and fame shall live, and laughing happy children shall praise thy goodness and thy loving kindness. Now, Klaus doesn't see himself as a hero to children, despite just having saved one, but he accepts this as the path chosen for him. Mary, Joseph, and Jesus head off to Egypt, and Klaus turns north towards his home. This brings us to chapter 2, titled The Road to Cavalry. We can immediately see that we've jumped ahead a little more than 30 years, since we find Klaus, using his Romanized name of Claudius, now a member of the Roman legion and serving the Roman governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. From his conversation with Pilate, we learn that he was on the run from Herod after saving the family that night, and eventually joined the legion as a way to avoid the vengeance of Herod's family. So Klaus never did get home. Quinn shows us that he knows both biblical and secular history. he accurately portrays Pilate as a man who clashes with the Jews in a number of ways, always seeming to violate or disrespect their customs. He says, "Had I but a single legion of men like thee, my Claudius, I'd drive this mutinous rabble at lance point till they howled like beaten dogs for mercy." Now, Pilate was, in fact, an inept leader whose actions often caused unrest among the Jewish people, and Quinn certainly hints at that here. The time is then set for us more exactly. Pilate asks Claus what he thinks about this so-called king of the Jews from Galilee, if he thinks he might be a threat. Certainly, Caiaphas, the high priest, says that he's inciting insurrection and should be jailed or crucified. Claus poo-poos this. He does not apparently yet realize that this teacher from Galilee is the same guy he once saved as a baby, but he says the following: "I saw this teacher when he came into the city but 4 days agone. Mild of mien he is, and very meek and humble, riding on an ass's colt and preaching in the temple, bidding all men live as brothers, fear God, honor the king, and render unto Caesar that which is his." So, from this we know that it is 4 days after Palm Sunday. So it's no surprise when Pilate gets word that Jesus has been arrested and the priests are demanding he be crucified. Pilate wants to placate them, and despite Claus's advice to tell the priests to essentially go jump in the lake, he says, quote, "I am sent to govern and to rule, but chiefly to collect the tax. A people in rebellion pay no tribute to the throne," unquote. And this is actually a very accurate picture of Pilate. His main job was indeed to make sure taxes continued to flow into Rome's coffers. And his previous incompetence had caused at least one riot. Anything he had to do to keep the population quiet, he would do it. What follows is pretty much a replay of the biblical accounts of Pilate questioning Jesus and initially deciding that he would be scourged, hoping that that would satisfy Caiaphas and the crowd. The Roman guards mockingly give Jesus his crown of thorns and his purple robe. The crowd continues to demand Jesus' life, and eventually Pilate shrugs and caves into this. To prick Caiaphas' pride, he plans to have a sign reading "King of the Jews" nailed to the cross, and he assigns Claus to go along with the crucifixion party and see that this is done. We see the crucifixion from Claus's point of view, and he, in fact, is the soldier who soaks a sponge in wine and offers Jesus a drink. Later, he turns out to be the soldier that plunges a spear into Jesus' side to show that he is dead. But he does this as an act of mercy to prevent Jesus' legs from being broken before he's taken down from the cross. Ironically, Claus, who had no real idea who Jesus is at this point, calls on a pagan god when he does this. "Now, by fathers Odin's ravens, thou shalt not break the prophet's legs. Let him die a man's death." Looking at Jesus' body, he ponders, "I've heard that he called himself the Son of God. Nor is that hard to credit. 'Tis no man, but a god who hangs on yonder gallows. Balder the Beautiful, slain by foul treacheries." Now, the crucifixion scene as a whole is presented with appropriate somberness and respect. Quinn's prose is quite good here. But we haven't reached the end of the scene yet. As he did when he saved the baby 30 years ago, he hears a voice. "Claus, thou took pity on a little child attacked by murderers in days agone. This day thy pity bade thee save a dying man from brutish violence. According to thy lights, thou dealt mercifully when thou thrust the spear into my side. Knowest thou not me, Claus?" And Claus realizes that the man who was just crucified is that baby he saved 3 decades earlier. He wonders if that means his work is finished, but he's told, "Thy work is not yet started, Claus. I will call, and thou wilt know my voice when I have need of thee." So Claus rides back towards the governor's palace, still musing about events and calling on Thor. He's definitely a hero, and he's determined now to do the work set out for him, but he still has no real understanding of who Jesus is. It's a great way to continue his character arc. Sudden conversions to Christianity do happen, of course, but Claus has no one really to explain everything to him yet. In fact, it wouldn't be until after the resurrection that even Jesus' disciples really understood what was going on. There was literally no one at this moment to explain anything to him. So he re-enters the city when, as described in the Gospel of Matthew, there is an earthquake. Answering a call for help, he aids an injured woman. He recognizes her as a local prostitute, but she'd been out looking for Jesus, who had once healed her of a sickness. She's repented of her old life, though Klaus himself doesn't see it that way. Despite her having a broken foot, once he realizes who she is, he starts to force her to walk away from him. But then he hears a voice telling him to show mercy on her and to take her to him. He obeys and finds out her name is Irina. She's seen him before and believes that they are destined to be wed and promises to serve him well. Klaus, though, continues to be awesome when he says, "Thou'lt be a wife and equal, aye, by Thor's iron gauntlets, and whoso fails to do thee honor will be shorter by a head." Now that is indeed an awesome bit of dialogue. I think it's fair to say that Klaus's journey regarding his future wife here, going from get out harlot to, hey, you're my wife and equal, is a little abrupt. But it's a cool scene nonetheless. And after all, he was obeying a direct command from God. Klaus marries her according to the tradition of the Northman, and her name is changed to Una. Soon after, there's rumors that the prophet has risen from the dead. The priests try to claim the body was stolen, but Klaus and Una, because of their respective experiences with Jesus, they believe in the resurrection. Klaus, in fact, is more convinced than ever that Jesus is Balder the Fair. The chapter ends with dialogue that confirms Klaus and Una are romantically in love, and as Klaus puts it, "We shall hear his call and answer him whenever he shall please to summon us, though the summons come from the lowest Niflheim." The third and final chapter in the story is titled The Long, Long Road, and it covers the next millennium very quickly. Its first sentence is, "Men grew old and grayed and died in service of imperial Rome, but neither death nor old age came to Klaus." The same is true, by the way, of Una, his wife. They both share the gift of immortality. Now, Klaus serves Pilate until Pilate dies. He continues to serve the Roman Empire, and centuries later, he's serving with Constantine when Christianity becomes the official religion of Rome. But here things in the now legal church begin to go awry. Now, it's important to note that this story is not an evangelical tract, and that is, it does not talk about the most important part of Christianity, which is accepting Christ as Savior for forgiveness of our sins. But this is a story about the origin of Santa Claus, and evangelism is not its purpose. It does say important things about Christian ethics, about kindness, compassion, forgiveness, and helping those in need. In its presentation of those ethics, as was its presentation of the Crucifixion, is respectful and right on target. Now, we see that when Klaus takes part in the capture of Jerusalem during the First Crusade. This would have been in the year 1099, so Klaus is now over 1,000 years old, having worked as a soldier for most of that time. Una is still with him. In fact, she sticks with him no matter where he goes. While on the crusade, she's dressed as his squire. When Jerusalem falls, though, the Christian soldiers rampage through the city, looting and killing the civilians. Klaus and Una beg them to show mercy, but it's to no avail. The priests and the monks urge the massacre to continue, having decided that non-Christians don't deserve mercy. Soon after, Una's claim to have met Jesus gets her charged with being a witch. This ticks off Klaus, and you definitely do not want to tick off Klaus. As the story says, "Darn it. And he went unto the prison house, and smote the warders where they stood, so that they fled from him, as from a thing accursed. And with his mighty axe he brake the heavy doors that shut her in. And they went forth from that place, and took to horse, and rode until they reached the sea. And no man durst stand in their way, for the fire of the northern lightnings burned in Klaus's eyes, and he raged like a wild berserker if any bade them stand and give account of whence they came, and where their mission led them." So, Klaus and Una are now on the lam. For many more years they travel, with Klaus serving in various armies and winning fame and fortune. But inevitably, they would come into conflict with the church when they claimed to have known Jesus. Now we jump ahead to a winter where they're living in a little city by the Rhine River. There's been a famine, and the people were in need. One night, Klaus is thinking of the local children, and he takes up a block of wood and he carves out a small toy sleigh. Una sees this and urges him to make a lot more. They will give them out along with some food they have stored up, which includes sweetmeats, figs, sugar, and dried grapes. They'll leave them on the doorsteps on Christmas Eve. They do this, attempting to do so secretly. Once again, a quote from the story. But one small lad, whose empty belly would not let him sleep, looked out from his garret window and espied the scarlet cloak Klaus wore. For Klaus went bravely dressed, as became a mighty man of valor, and one who walked in confidence with princes. Now the kid, though, isn't sure that he didn't just dream this. So Klaus and Una's gift-giving remains anonymous for the moment. We see, though, that Quinn is now beginning to directly insert elements of the Santa Claus story into his tale. Klaus and Una walk the streets the next morning, and they love seeing the joy they've brought to the children. The kid who saw them eventually does tell his story, and Klaus becomes known as Santa Claus to the poor because they see him as, quote, a saint who walked the earth in human guise and had compassion on the suffering of the poor, unquote. But the corrupt church doesn't see it that way, seeing it has the foul design of some fell fiend who sought to steal men's soul away by bribing them with Satan's sweetmeats. They complain to the governor, saying, he hath sought to buy thy people's loyalty away by little gifts made to children. Look thou to it. If thou failest to put him in restraints before he does more mischief, thou art no friend of the Landgrave, from whom thou holdst this city as a fief. So Klaus and Una have to make a break for it, and a sudden snowstorm helps them get away. They're actually assumed to have died in the storm, but they live and they travel to the Baltic. Here the story again gets a little bit abrupt in introducing a new element, but it is an additional part of the Santa mythos. They meet the elf people, small people who live beneath the earth and don't age because they have no souls. As the story tells us, they would live until the final judgment day, when they and the great host of the olden god should stand before the throne of the Most High and hear sentence of an everlasting torment. Klaus and Una confront them without fear because they're wearing crosses, and Klaus still carries a whomping big sword. Klaus talks to them, and he learns that the little people do perform kindly deeds for humans, but only tales of terror and wickedness are told about them. The elves have an undeservedly evil reputation. Klaus asks them, would ye find it happiness to serve your human neighbors if ye could? The elf king says yes, and explains that they are great artificers. They can make wondrous things out of wood, stone, and metal, but the priests tell people to refuse what they call fairy gifts. Now Klaus hears that voice again. Thou hast need of these small men. Take them with thee on the road which shall be open to thy feet. So Klaus promises to put the skills of the elves to good use, and the elves swear eternal loyalty to him. They pull out a small sleigh of gold that can be stretched out to normal size and has room for all of them, and it's pulled, of course, by flying reindeer. They fly far to the north and build a home. The elves get to work, and by next Christmas, they've made a mountain-high pile of toys. Klaus uses the magic sleigh to deliver them, then heads home to share a feast with his wife and the elves. Now, Quinn, by the way, also refers to the elves as dwarves. He uses those two terms interchangeably. Klaus doesn't need his sword and his axe anymore. He's laid them aside, because now he is finally performing the task set for him on the road to Bethlehem. The story ends this way. Odin's name is but a memory, and in all the world none serves his altars. But Klaus is very real today, and every year 10,000 times 10,000 happy children wait his coming. For he is neither Claudius the centurion, nor Klaus the mighty man of war, but Santa Claus, the very patron saint of little children. And his is the work the Master chose for him that night 2,000 years ago. His the long, long road that has no turning so long as men keep festival upon the anniversary of the Savior's birth. And that, children, is where Santa Claus comes from, despite what Fred Astaire tries to tell us in Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Though the story is a little abrupt in introducing new story elements at the last moment, it's well constructed, it's respectful to the story of Christ, and it's full of a sense of adventure, and it's just plain fun to read. So that's it for this episode. Once again, my name is Tim DeForest. You can visit my blog at Comics, Old Time Radio, and other cool stuff. If you want to read this story, I will post a link where you can find a digital copy of that issue of Weird Tales. It is also available from a book. It was reprinted as a book in 1948, and you can still buy inexpensive reproductions of that book on sources like Amazon.com. You can also get the story electronically through Amazon for a Kindle. So this story is easily available to find and read, and you really need to. It can just give Die Hard a run for its money as the adventure Christmas story of all time. So keep an ear out for full-length episodes in which we directly talk about the works of Edgar Rice Burroughs, and I'll be back with additional mini episodes as well. And until then, thank you so much for listening.